How do we symbolism everything in settings and lines of travel? What does a distraction mean? What does it mean in positions? Well, it's misdirecting information. It's misconcluding our settings or oscillations in our system and travel. It's attractions. See, there's an echo, hollow. Right? I was in correlation setting off of CNET, back in lines, now back in space lines of hotel golf. So my voice is changing the atmospheres of space and time in real measure, real scale, real balance, existing only in settings. That's why you hear an echo. I hear the echo of me, right? But it's all done from inside of me. But who's the me? The mind, the existing. That's me. So we have to truly understand how to use that information settings and stop seeing ourselves as distractions and start to see yourself just all of us expanding, exploring, and evolving our systems. That's why we're here. People need questions, and they come from you inside. It's a disassociation system, location, and settings. How you see anything through distraction is everything in volume and mass. How important is to have a life system to a life-supporting system to look east to its power cell? But you know what's more powerful? Is if you're an ongoing system and running your own system and everything inside it, and it's operating inside your system locations. What's next in these equations? Nothing. Nothing lanes, high centers, and formation lines, and screen adaptation and flux. So you focus on nothing, shows you a mass of everything. What does that mean? Focus on nothing. How do I do that? Well, it's not how. You're just doing it. You're just not consciously aware you're doing it. So nothing is a process of nothing existing, nothing in position, nothing in panel, nothing in space, nothing in time. So if there's nothing in time, what's there to talk about? Nothing, which is basically the mind of stillness, which is the minds of empty space. So if there's empty space, there's nothing to perceive, is there? Because everything around you is in balance. So you're in the mind, you're in the stillness, you're going to see everything that you need to see through mass now. That puts lines of volume, accelerations of vac. Evac lines, screen adaptations, all of the flux, screen adaptations. Once you understand your imagination, then you understand where you are in your imaginations, everything's inside, outside, inside of you, everything starts making sense. Because that's how your reality is actually set up in real time. Existing and evolving and clocking all foundations on set positions. Everything's happening all at once. We already know what that means. If everything's happening all at once, everything's evolving all at once, everything's expanding all at once. That means everything around you is in its own operation that governs its own space. You have your own space, they have their space. When I say they, I'm talking about everything of consciousness that you're not consciously aware of. You're not consciously aware that you brought these things in from attraction. You're not consciously aware that you bought a phone. You're not consciously aware that you bought a car. You're not consciously aware that you buy food. Now, what if I told you that the mind has already set that up? What if I told you that the position all levels of the hardware and software has already set that up through your brain, which is its computer, which is its operation setting, which is its foundation system, which is its hotel, which is its golf? What if I told you that the heart itself has already set up its time and measure and scale and balance in real time, existing all at once and happening all at once? What if I told you the actual soul is identifications to your body that you're always in existing of? It's just all lines of timelines all at once. See? Everything is happening all at once now. And it always has been and always will be. But how you codify that is basically how to see that in all formation to systems. What is an attraction to the body is all levels and opposite tracks. It says lines of polarities, line direct signals, ground lines of life. Lights, force, high course centers, and force direction of time centers, lines of sequence over pi. So we have to process that in our position location to our systems. So the steady track lines are high calculation, high modified. Directions line lines are high center. There's the earth. Right? Process communications. Setting lines of signals. Gravitational pull. High lines of travels. Indirect signal lines of ground communication. 144 lines of settings of flux over screen. 3 indicates lines of grounds. Setting core lines. Travels endpoint communication lines. Temperature readings, scales, communication lines, high position, right? X8000. 3 signals, ground lines, or surface attractions. Energize. Polarities, center lines, sectors, vectors, and quads, and set track communications. Now, directing lines of high centers. Process calculation screen lines into 3 lines of flux over triangulation over split lines of anomaly. 3 scramble screens. Directing lines in position to one platform, two platforms, and three lines of measure and scale. Setting process lines, directing lines and platforms of three lines of scale and four lines of communications. Directing signals, ground lines of surface and travel communications, and setting. All right. So directing lines is center operation of its earth. Directing lines and ground lines are sending process communications setting high travels. Indirect signal locations 144 setting. Process calculations of ground lines sets operation sequence and panels of communication setting of dimensional sail, solar sail, and tractions. So setting lines of travels puts lines of 333. Now we get position lines in 144 server. Setting direct signal locations comes into high positions, high tone. Measures and scales, rhythms and pattern, and track communications. Okay, and center calculations. All right, so setting core centers sets lines of provision. Bring it back home, back in sequence, back in panel, back in operation. All right, now this is how it sets out lines of communication, lines of checks and balances, directing signal location settings. Process lines, setting track centers, obsolete. Calculate and modify absolution. Okay, earth line, setting travel lines, point lines of graph. Okay, all lines of symbolism, setting core center location settings. In your pods, synchronize the settings and travel, right? That's all the set positions, all right? So the earth itself, okay, is cutting all tethers to your system and travel. The body itself is going to be 144. Okay, so it's going to be cut off in tether, all attached. Detached, signal line. Cut the cords. Setting sequence lines of panels and tractions. All through center position. Right? All detached. After tomorrow on screen to 6 a.m. Okay? Done. Now, what happens next in sequence is the conversion lines of flat. Everybody knows what a flat line is. All right, setting core center location, life support system, lines of track centers of time measure, time scales, communicates a high ground line, coordinates and theta, communicates lines of theta, line rotation cycles, high generator location setting, alpha tones, lines of beta, travels in point lines of graph into server line position 144. So you guys get in floating screens, directed signal lines and set position lines of center, line communication lines of its pod, directing lines of grounds. Setting core centers, all right, set position lines of calculations. Okay, go through correlation lines of screens, directing lines. You'll all be floating in space. I'll be floating in space until you get in your 144 server tractions. From that to this to that. Clocking centers starts to set position 24 center. Okay, 24 center is sequence. Setting lines of communication, lines of three lines of measurement scale. 4 lines of flux, 4 lines of signals, 4 settings, 4 tractions, 4 divisions. Right? Equals lines of 3, 4. Setting communication on the clocking lines of high centers of zero gravity. 0.1, setting was of 0.2, set position of 0.3 and 0.4. Setting lines of 0.5 setting line track location to a system all through 144 flux. Okay, that's in provision lines of cycle, 6 a.m. So it's going to be 0.5 in the Richter scale. So setting lines of box frames, the Schumann resonance comes in high tones. Directing signal lines of grounds sets core centers lines of travel. Box frame communication setting. Schumann resonance is going to be line screening. And set position of 4 signals and 8 lines of signals and ground lines of surface. Okay, process lines, the Schumann resonance is going to go through alpha into beta at line setting. Floating in space, setting instructions in time sequence. Says clocking line, screen adaptation, setting high position into 24 measure, into calculate, modify. 12 line out cycles, and data formation lines of grounds. Sets lines of 24 sequence. But the perimeter line screen adaptations allows the coordinates in 2 lines of tractions and 3 lines of 2. It sets position location high centers. 2 4 lines, 2 4 lines, sequence lines of 6. Setting travels over 9. 9 lines of 6 in travel. Sets core centers into flux over line, 6 lines of measure, set lines of 9 lines of communications of flux over screen, and direct signals of panel. Process lines of high position lines of alpha tone, then we get into delta, and then we come into theta. Set lines of pyramid, track location to image, screen adaptations of flux over screen, 144 server, and set position of its operation setting. Process line, core centers, stargates, and portals, starts flushing the filters and communicates lines A tracks. Setting ground lines of surface and kaleidoscope communication lines of measure and scale. Scales position, location, and travels. Puts all communication setting all through tractions. Now, directed lines of flights, high course centers, your FAA, process communication lines, your delta headings, travel point lines of graph has a center course system in travels, and position lines in your pods. Setting lines of dimensional scale and dimensional sail lines of solar sail. Solar flux over screen, 3 lines of measure and 4 lines of tractions. Setting lines of 7 track communication lines of 7 windows in a 24 sequence. Setting ground lines and calculation screen lines, adaptations, high centers, puts all position lines of the body frame into 144 provision. And set lines of tractions. All through traction at 6 a.m. Okay, so we go through the graph lines. The core track location of the mind is already set up line position location of tethers. The attach and screen location setting comes in the auxiliary. Setting lines and inputs, lines adaptation setting to the output to the outer line screen adaptations of flux over screen. Okay, and set tractions. Okay, this is how it's going to be set up, 6 a.m. in travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. The ground course centers has a central line communication system, right? Directing lines of grounds, center course centers in position of flux. So earth line in one tone, set lines of earth lines of point lines of one setting, process lines, space lines of modulation, setting ground lines in position lines of measure and scale communication lines of surface and tractions. Directing lines of grounds, center course system is center operation setting of tubing, 2 tubings and 4 lines into highways, 4 lines of flux, 3 lines of measures and cross angles. Time measure, time scales. Setting lines of communication lines to open wane, high course centers lines of travels, right? Now the main line screen has a window pane. That window pane of 4 lines of screens opens all signals in position lines of platforms. Setting travels into cerebellum, into sim cortex, mystical cortex, and mystical design line in modification setting of prototypes. Setting prototypes in high centers lines of travel, directing lines and ground lines of setting. Process lines of indicate system, all cross lines of angles, and set travels and direct signals and modification system. Hoo-ah. All right. Setting lines inside traction, inside position. Okay. All right. Constantly bringing it back home in sequence lines of panel and travel. Okay. So they go into frame lines. They come into the obsoletes, calculation lines, absolution. Absolution is adaptation lines, adaptation. Process calculation lines into all course centers, lines of travel. Directing lines of view, setting lines of communication, time lines of measure and scale. So split lines of anomaly, 3 travels and forks. Constellation past and 3 lines of measure. Scales communication lines of past, present, and future line direct signals and grounds. Set calculation lines of past, future, present, past. Set 3 lines of signals and grounds. Set core lines of platforms, directing lines of grounds, and set position of center operation system on existing through travel. Calculate modify lines of 3 tubings, cross line 3 lines and perimeters, platforms 1, 2, and 3 lines of measure and scale. Setting scale lines, course centers, crosses angles into 3 lines of 4 and flux at 3 lines of communication. Directing signal lines of panels, Stargate portals, starts evolving the system and travels endpoint communication high centers into kaleidoscopes in communication setting and modulation set lines and screens. Setting ground lines, the opposite system, goes through core lines of direct and redirect, setting course lines of channels and direct signals in position of 1 lines of flux over screen. Directing lines, all lines, allocates line connection setting and northern lights and travel. All right, so the northern lights and high lines, split lines anomaly, discharge in course centers, waving line screen adaptation, solar panels, directing calculation lines, directing in modification grounds, as everybody's going to be floating in space and travel. Obsolete, course centers, malfunctions, travel lines, virus line connection setting, process lines of time sequence. Course centers, line divergence, allegiance, alliance, existing all at once, waiting in panel, and process calculation line, direct signals. So 1 modification grounds in a 3-dimensional line changes course center location setting, going back to location setting back to 1 number. They synchronize the course centers, line communication lines of 3 zeros in travel. Sets calculation lines of 4 lines of high center, lines of 4 zeros of travel. Sets 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of scale. Balance communication high centers of flux. Setting position lines of 24,000 grounds and 2,400,000 line signals location setting in all calculate and modify. Now the escalates calculates the escalates course centers of 3 lines of tractions, direct lines of 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scale, 3 lines of balance, and 3 lines of position. Setting communication lines of grounds and setting calculation setting your Skynet and grids and set tractions. All right, so high signals operate the system in travel communications direction. Okay, very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. Inside position. Okay? So they're going to be centralized and decentralized at the same time into inner line core centers, intercons, directing lines of their pods. Their vessel core centers line communication setting has a modification system. They lose all course of time, all lines of communication, acceleration, screen lines, adaptations, plusing screen adaptation of zero gravity, line condition setting gravitational pull, setting acceleration lines back in time, position location, all levels, high speed lines of central line core centers, flash drive, indirect signals, and ground line communication, center core, division lines and settings, high core centers, losing track location in the metabed, energy grids, and power grids, setting core lines of travels in position lines of power, directing signal line communication setting, modulation high core centers in the gain modulation screen, directing line screen adaptations and travels, 4 lines of signals, 3 lines of communications back in setting. The process communication lines goes back to 0 and 4 lines of signals, processes communication lines of point lines of 0, point lines of 5. Setting travels in point communications, sets all lines of metrical meters and scales and balance. The set communication lines goes back in time now, right? So the body goes back in time sequence and fitting screen adaptations. They don't continue on the next game, or the next level of the system until they get their 144 frequency. Sending travels in the server sets lines of the magnetic force line that puts everything in position location to its mainframe. Mainframe comes into its high position location in their domain to my master domain. Sending lines of travel sets a direct line link in line communication setting and processing. Process in position location, they come into their own setting to their own dimensional lines of space and time. Process in that position location, they lose all measure, all scale, all balance, all time measure. Scales communication high direct signals, they fade out their images and line screen adaptations of flux that filters out their system line position of 1-dimensional lines of scale, 3-dimensional lines of signal, setting processing communication setting all through track location of its system in all communication settings, all through tractions. So basically that puts lines of game over in sentence tractions, isn't it? So they don't continue on a force line in settings, so they just float in space. They're fully exposed, modulating line screen adaptation all levels of travel. As they're in position lines, they're all lines of a clocking system now. That puts all calculated modified. They're in sequence lines of panel. They automatically go out of the 24-line sequence back into 12 measure. Puts them back into their 1-dimensional lines of panel and body frame in position 3-dimensional line. Back force line, triangulation, high core centers, and acceleration setting and 140,000 frequency as server. Setting lines of travel, setting line direct signals. So that position lines of high centers and course lines of calculation setting. Modulation screen adaptations and divergence, allegiance, and lines. Separates modulation line screens, adaptation all levels, and track location and delta heading. Tango Foxtrot. Directing lines of setting, Rainbow. Calculation lines of galaxy, Syria. Directing lines, high position location of Papa Uniform. Directing lines of grounds, center course center. Echo chamber, Zulu. Fox line. Directing signal lines, echo chambers. Directing signal locations, high setting. Process in position lines of Zebra. Zebra Force. Calculation high centers. Calculating modify, Zulu Fox, directing calculation screen lines, adaptations, Alpha Bravo, directing lines, Asgard Bravo, directing line communication of grounds, center course system, and Rainbow, Frost Bridge, and Golden Bridge at the same sequence, same time, same measure, set in scales, back in time. Back in time, guys. So the body goes back in timeline. Setting lines communications goes back in frame. As it gets in 12 lines of measure, it's now nebula. Nebula line records its system, and 3 lines of triangulates and settings of flux of screen adaptation. 3 signals of modification grounds, setting back force line connections of pi in generation screens, and 3 lines of signals in track correlation system and travel communications and setting. Okay? So they live in the central settings of 3 constellation past, present, future, all at once in set positions, but back in time. The body line server location settings set the high core centers of 3 triangles, 3 core centers line position of 4 measure, sets position lines of 4 attractions and direct signals and ground lines of service, 1, 2, 3, and 4 panels as track location. Okay? Complicated stuff. You understand location of Schumann resonance, drive communication lines that force its angles and communication with setting. Okay? All right. Symbolism lines, once they get into the back in the 12-line clocking system, they go back in time sequence. They go into 12-line signals. Process on 11, lines of 10. Then you start living into the lower planes of existence. 10-line signals over lines across lines of 9, over lines of sitting, set position of 7, 6, and 5 lines of measure. Okay? So every time they get in sequence line, they're constantly going back in time to parallels. 1 position, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 lines of communication, lines of travel. So they go into lower planes line divisions, process lines of 1, process lines of 10, process lines of 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5 track locations through a pyramid. Directing signal lines of grounds, center Schumann resonance and travel communications. Point lines of graph, setting calculates line direct signals, changing core lines, high direct signals, and modification grounds. Setting lines of 12 signals of beta, off lines beta, alpha. Setting core centers, lines of zero gravity. Overdrafting sequence over lines of high centers. In lines indicate lines of flux. That puts all communication lines in point lines, indicate high centers, lines of travel. Direct lines of 2+ lines, high core centers, triangulation. Set position lines of travels in box frame. Y screen, directing signals, lines, theta. Process calculates lines, omega. Setting core centers, lines of all lines of delta. Delta heading comes in high signals, high core centers, lines of travel, direct signal grounds. So at setting signals, they automatically live in high position lines of grounds and set positions to the opposite angles. Setting travel point lines of graph, center core system at a 45 flush, time sequence times panel. Process lines indicates in setting ground lines of 1, ground lines of 2, process lines of 3, and measured lines of 4 and track communications. Directing lines of grounds, center communication lines, inhibitors over screen adaptations to auxiliary. Coming into the auxiliary line screen, in and out, and audio is flush over screen. Directing lines of signals in platitude screen adaptations. Process living in the center core system of past, present, and future in center core system of 3 lines of measure and 3 scales of communications. Hoo-ah. Now, I know it's complicated stuff, right? But they live in the tether line. So they get into motivation screen, back in sequence, back in panel, back in programming. So the center core system puts them all levels and set track location lines into high center location of travel, directing signal lines of grounds, communication lines of service, process lines of 1, process lines of 3, setting lines of 6 over frame. So setting lines of ground lines of service and window frames to track communications and setting. Indicate ground lines of service location setting, high position location of travel through setting. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. Inside track locations. Okay, inside track locations. Okay, guys? All right. Now, amazing how you set that up in travel. Okay? So they come into discords and discharge. They get detached in all lines of all formation settings, all stargates close and signal. Setting lines of ground lines of surface, set position lines of measure, scales communication, high lines of position lines of high position location to its system. They start living in the past in real time. See, the thing is, we can't have a central line setting to 144 flux in the server until they identify their system inside lines of their imagination core. Put some lines of high center location to its theta. The process calculates the high screen adaptation in 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. That's 4 panels of sequence. 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of setting. Now I have to identify how this works in all lines of provision to understand the position lines and modification grounds. Once they get into 12 lines, they go down in shift line to different planes. They live into the non-existent planes of lower frequencies, of lower spectrums, of space-time and measure in real-time setting. Okay, all 3 tractions. Okay, different planes of existing. Lower grounds, but in line positions, all right? So, time measure scales everything in tractions through your 144 server lines. Setting lines of sequence puts all calculated modifying tractions. But it's amazing how you come in that position as a high setting, right? To a low setting. Now, the reason why I say amazing is because you're starting to understand more levels of you. This is all lines that applicate system location of the game levels that you're not, and start to understand the game levels that you are, of what you've always been in, is the process of inside you, is knowing exactly how to use it in track location of the game levels, understanding how to play the game, the instructions how to play the game, and the characters and the players that you bring inside the game. To go into the next level of the game puts the lines of maths and calculations into your network system. Streaming your system lines of travel, getting longitude and latitude, and focusing inside of you of just expanding, exploring, and evolving yourself. That's all this is. Okay? But live in a cycle, in a spectrum, in a force of recognition setting, doesn't process you of indications. It puts you everything back to where it says track location and setting, all through operation. All right, so setting sequence lines of 6 a.m. to travel. So once they get into 12 lines of sequence, they go back on the clock in settings and set positions. But see, this is the time measure now. It goes back in time. Set core centers, line communication setting. Sets lines of high centers. The process of communication changes everything to time. Now the timelines basically change everything in the particle system. Now in that track location setting, living back in time processes position location to its allocated time frame. Setting that communication setting puts all line division location to its system. all through attractions. Okay, guys? All right, so sonic communications, all lines, signals, and travel communications. Okay. So they live in a board game, but it's a lower division of spectrum light. That's all it is in setting. If you get modification lines of 222 or 333 or 444 or 555 or 666, it doesn't matter. What does it indicate with you? If you don't codify your system, okay, there's no central settings of balance of anything in travel, especially when you're in your platforms of communications in lower divisions. So that's all it is. They go through the tubing down into the lower division lines of spectrum. That's where they start living. All right, so they process here. Here's one signal in some position. That's then there. And here's another one setting of center, and one over here in platform. Okay, so there's two on the same platform and one in position lower platform communications. Okay. So going back into your frame puts everything into all lines of high centers. The more they go higher in the mind lines, they become more of their true authentic self and measure and scale. But the auxiliaries and the inputs and the outputs has no division location of tactics. Setting lines of screen adaptations puts them into lower division location of spectrum of the game level. Lower division. Okay. This is the above division. Above cycle here. This is the platform they should be on to travel. Okay, right here. Not here. Right, so they're going to go down to 12 lines, 11, 10, 9, and live the spectrum boards, setting lines of graph communication lines and perimeters. They're going to be line signal location setting. They're going to be attached to the lower frames now, travel. And set box frame. Triangulation box communications, setting to travel. Okay? So if you understand how this is all set up, then you understand how this all modifies your system inside attractions. How important it is to understand yourself through imaginations of what you are and vision through the cycles. Okay? But that's all it indicates. It's a lower spectrum of consciousness. That's all it is. That's where they go into. And the body can't handle that frequency line because it's an amplification system that's not supposed to be there. Right? You're not supposed to be there. And that's what it is in attractions. But see, the thing is, the conscious of the mind is not ready to understand that through acceptance. They have to get out of the one-dimensional mind of three-dimensional thinking. And once they get out of that lines, they get into the core lines of communication setting. The mind's already set up the platform of the communication of the game itself, and really understand where the body needs to be next is all through precog. Getting lines of precog puts every line in positions going to the next levels of the game. Hooah. It doesn't get any more powerful than this, guys. Okay? Right. Because a true understanding of how this is all working and now in sequence. How it gets all communication lines of balance now, right? Understand attractions, 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of center. 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of center. But sir, I thought this is a triangle. No, it's not. It never is. If it wants to be a triangle, it'll be a triangle. If you want to be a triangle, you be a triangle. But that's up to you. But it's constantly changing the frequency. It's never the same shape. It's never the same space. It's never the same time. It's existing and evolving and expanding its operation of its own setting, of its own intelligence, of its own system. That's governing its own space and time. Okay? 3 lines of flux. 4 lines of measure. See? Higher level frequency, right? Into the mind itself, right? Because you're letting everything go. Now you're starting to see everything of consciousness and what it really is through its intelligence, right? Eyeline screens and its pyramid locations. There's the eyes. And there's the nose. And here's the mouth. There's the intelligence that's controlling the box frame. Triangulation flux, setting eye sequence, lines of triangulation, all through its pyramid, through its set position. There's intelligence right there. Boom. But you guys don't see that, do you? You only see a triangle. See? It's how little we know. We underestimate and we overestimate what we know through value. Now, how do we value yourself? Is how we indicate ourselves in travel. How to get in that communication setting puts everything in track communication through system, all through operation. Right? Now, once we understand the flux, set position lines of box, okay, then it can travel through triangulation or a box of itself in the lines of communication. It can do whatever it wants, right? Because it knows what it is through its intelligence. Same with you in traction. Right? The box wants to be a circle through a clocking system. Okay, it wants to travel outline settings over cross location of screen lines adaptation. Right? It's all levels of what it wants to do, right? But getting collaboration is very powerful. But this is the conceptual setting, what's happening in set tractions at 6 a.m. in travel. Okay. 4 angles of flux over screen in set tractions. Different levels of the game. Okay. Team high signals, high line conditions, all levels of pyramid truck communications, right? Above the signal, below the signal. Just the pyramid itself. That's all it is. So setting lines of team, setting lines of units, setting lines of operatives. Right? Everything below, anything below 5 line signals is the ground lines of shift lines of anomaly. Okay? So they're in the platforms in lower division of consciousness in track communication of this game. All right? So platforms here, setting positions, platforms here, setting positions, platforms here, and set position to locations of setting. Okay? So living those platforms allocates time frames. 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of scale. Okay? Now, directing line view, the process of communication over lines of signals, 3 lines of course centers into positions, high set calculation, mystical cortex, and 4 box frames. Setting course centers, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface attractions. Okay? Different levels of the game, guys, through window frame and travel. Okay? But anything below, well, they're in sequence lines of grounds now. And lower spectrum of light, and set position location of karma, direct lines of platforms, and traffic communication setting overrides their system communications. Okay? Open up the window frames of travel communication in setting. Okay? Open up the doors in sequence of panel communication lines of surface interactions. Right? See it in all different angles, guys, which your game is in travel. Indirect signals to signal locations. Right? You see 2 panels, upswing, downswing, bring cross location, inner center, location, outer center, in set position, your frame set position, calculation systems. All right? But amazing when you see it from inside tractions off this setting. So platforms here, okay, setting lines of travels, and this is where it gets into lower division lines, dimensions, and scale. All right? So 5th dimension, 6th dimension, 8th dimension. Okay? So everybody's in at different lines in their pyramid screen, in their oscillation screens, adaptations to absolutions, and structural correlations setting to astral projections, astral travels, astral connections. Let's go through again. There's the pyramid, right? But the pyramid needs a box frame to understand its levels of its game, multi-levels in travel. Okay, data files of 1, data files of 2, data files of 3. Setting course centers, lines of position, all process, line condition settings, center course and tethers, setting attractments, and lines of platforms in travel, in communication setting of surface. Setting ground lines of setting, process lines of 1, process lines of 3, and set tractions, communication, walking lines of sequence. Setting ground lines, high centers, over cross location, triangulation, and flux over screen adaptation. Okay, it's complicated stuff when it gets really interesting. Then we go through another box frame. This is just triangulation box, guys. That's all it is. All through measure, all through scale. Then we override in line send inside location to its game itself and travel. Okay. And then we overline the sequence, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds, and set position of surface. Okay. And then we go through overline signals and ground lines of calculation setting, high lines of surface. Okay. So there's so many ways to understand how to go through the platforms in set position location measure that opens all scales communication in your system to the game levels that you go into different levels of interaction. Okay. So the one-dimensional line frame has a course lines of channel that process lines of 3 lines of measures and 4 scales. Okay. Set calculation lines 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you get to 5, okay, you're going into the 5th dimension and up in 3 angles in position of 4 measure. Okay. Now this is all through triangulation. Okay. Into a set position of security. All right. Now, getting that position line centers, the intercourse system changes the platforms and settings of 3 measure and scale. Setting ground lines of setting, you're in offline rotation, travels in point communication lines of graphs, inside and outside tractions. Right? Now, this is the window frame. Every box frame is a window frame in set position to its locations. Stepping procedures, understand the game, its level, and set tractions. All right, so modification grounds, overline cross locations. So each one is a pyramid that puts lines into astral travels and track communications and direction. All right, then we go into the high centers. Now the low earth line tone sets a spectrum light. Okay, living in the platforms of communication setting and back in time. Okay, so they live back in time now because you're going below 5. If you're going below 5 sequence, you're going downshift lines of anomaly and track location lines of a ladder. The ladder itself is its perimeter and set tractions and direction. So what we have to understand is how to go through the platforms of indication grounds, high lines of surface and high position lines of power. Set our course centers high calculation setting instead of going downshift lines of anomaly. Setting travels endpoint lines of graph and measure of scale in 3 lines of measure and set position calculation settings. Process calculation lines, ground lines, shift lines of anomaly, and set position location and travel. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at this, but it's always inside and outside of your set position, inside tractions of the setting. All right? So this is what you can do through a triangulation box. Okay? All right, so I want you to get a true understanding how this all volumes your settings into all levels, how you see yourself, right? Through your awareness, your consciousness. Okay? Awareness, consciousness. It's a game board, right? Awareness is a platform. Consciousness is a higher platform. Okay, so you're constantly aware of consciousness, right? Then you have to understand its box frame. There's the box frame. Okay? Now you understand the platform and set position to its location, setting, and travel. Okay, it's really interesting when you just put things all together in travel communications. Oh, you see me disappear? You see me vortex? All right, so platforms of dimensional door. Scales, the position of balance, and set lines of sequence and scale communications. Overline settings, panels, lines, high course centers into syntax, cortex, and codex. Setting lines of travels, endpoint lines of pi, and track communications. Directing lines of angles, and 4 communication lines of grounds. Okay, different levels of the game. Line signals, ground service, ground travels. Position lines of 3 centers in process of 4. Okay, now, directing lines, course centers, has an open window and frame and track communications. All right, so set lines of course center has a symbolism lines of tractions and 3 lines of flux and panels over screen and clocking lines of 0. Now the 0 allocates time frame and set position lines measure and scale. Over cross lines screens, direct lines and 3 lines and 4 lines of measure sets the cerebro of the cerebellum and set tractions and direction. Okay, overlapping sequence, ground lines of surface and travel. Okay. So we take the window frame inside line. Okay, and high force the communications setting in track communications. Okay, directing lines of length into all window frames and travel communications. Okay. Setting lines of mountain sequence and sonar lines, interference of travel, endpoint lines, graph echo chambers and travel communications and settings. Process indicates system, all lines of ground service in track communications and string theory. Now, string theory has a high temperature reading and position lines of high course. Let's get into gold. Modificates its system lines of travel and direct signals of grounds. And we open sequence lines, communications to measure and scale to its mapping sequence. Open line channels. Here's the space anomaly. There's the space. See? Setting lines of traction centers. Add positions over gold over black. Set position lines of travel into orange. Indicates settings of travel communications. Directing the calculation lines, solar graph communication screen adaptation. Signify grounds, open all signals into purple. Setting travels, direct signals grounds. Changing purple, and direct signals ground communications. Right? Bring it out, there is traction. Face recognition. Okay? Always a face recognition when you get in touch with grounds of surface and travel, guys. It's very powerful stuff in set position, right? But you can't see it from here. You got to bring it in, set position lines of travel. Okay? I showed you that before, but this is very powerful, how you start to see directions of what you're doing through plateaus. Understand your 12 foundation grounds, right? Which is your measured scales, your geometrics. So let's get into 4 box frames. 4 box frames, okay, in a rectangle. Process lines indicate setting over cross-locations of box frames and form measure. Getting complicated now, right? Because they're going to be in the high lines for formula the equations. 2 calculation lines of grounds. So you're seeing this, and you're seeing it from inside, right? Setting lines of flux and 3 lines of measure and scale. Oh, there's the intelligence. All right, then we ground shift, and we open all line cross location atmospheres of space line, okay? And then we over cross location inside outside lines of pi. Process calculation line, ground lines of setting and set position of symbolism. Okay, and then we open up the window frames, outside division in locations. Okay, it gets very confusing when you go outline setting. Crosses lines 1/3 graph in communications. Okay, very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun when you get really understanding how to go position location, higher lines of division, lines of settings, all with attractions. Setting lines of wall sequence, over cross location of screens, and adaptation lines of surface attractions. Inside and outside set position. So you got a teleportation vessel inside, but you see inside the vessel itself. You see its hallway. You see its modulation screen. You see everything attractions, right? And then you get positions all levels of its grounds and calculations. Okay? And then you line cross the screens, 3 lines of measure in set position. Okay, and then you change the settings all through direction. Look at this. Wow. So now it's moving this way. Crossing line screen has a high centers and process communication. So let's overline the sequence. Change the box frame. And direct signals to open line sequence of panels. 3 signals of grounds of surface interactions. Okay. Setting lines of tether, 3 lines of cross, angles of 2-point lines of flat screens and set travel. Then we change the core centers, electrical fencing, and 3 lines of signals and grounds. And process lines of 3 angles and signal location of grounds and setting. Process communicates to a system all through travel. But what do you see in position? Face recognition. Okay, so I'm just showing you how powerful it is when you just let things go and let things travel on its own. Know exactly what it's doing in set tractions, all direct signal location to its metric location in the system all through travel. So we modify the tablets and tablets line screen, the 3 lines of signals, interpretation grounds, and 3 lines of measure and scale. The process communicates the setting open lines, the location set to energetic dome settings and travel. Okay. And then we change the window frames in 3 lines of angles and 3 lines of flux and downshift lines of anomaly. Screen adaptations, process lines, triangulation over here, and travel. Okay, and we indicate the wall screens, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds, set tractions, all through that direction. So, you connect to the webbing and the screen lines adaptations of flux over screen. Open lines in travel. Change communication lines of angles and communications and setting. Process lines at inner center locations. You standing in the center of operation to a system of attraction. Okay, now you're teleporting inside your telepad, your launching system. And here's all your computers in its operation system, in settings of its org and travel. Okay, so there's so many things that you can do when you just let everything go. So it does itself in all positions of systems, all through attractions, all through communications. But you're constantly going to see yourself all the time in setting, right? The mind set up the map. Okay? Now, once you understand that, if the mind has set everything up, okay, space-time discoveries, okay, setting position location when I'm talking about all levels, season 1, episode 2, where basically I talk about in travel communications, where basically it modifies the system lines of travel and basically getting to understand the mind itself is the creation of space and time. So if it is the creation of space and time, that means the body has to be there in alignment in time measure, time scale, time balance, time calculation system, all through real-time setting, all through attractions. So that's the connection to me, all signals all at once. All right, and then I'm here, okay, and then I'm going here, and then I'm over here all at once. Different lines of angles, different lines of me, inside of me, seeing me, all tractions of me. Okay, so I'm here, 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 and here, traveling all at once, all through an orb, all through a prototype, all through measure, all through scale, existing all at once and evolving all at once. But I'm constantly expanding and evolving myself and putting myself everywhere I need to be and picking up what? New intel, new data, so I can understand how to use that and have full access to that of clearance, okay, in track locations. Okay, guys? So you're constantly changing platforms, you're constantly changing time, you're constantly changing measure and scale on teleportation light. That's all you do in the settings. Center operation, inside travel, and communications. All right, look at this. Inside travel. See? That's what you want to do, inside a travel of everything. Okay, I mean, look at it really close. I mean, that's basically what it is. You know, everything's inside and outside of you. But that's what it is. That's all it is. It's inside, outside, inside of you. You start to see everything inside of you. There's your simulation. Okay, bring it in. See? And it's traveling. See? Traveling on its own. So it's very powerful when you just start creating things, line screens, adaptation, your dimension lines and settings that puts everything into one division or two division or three division. So once you understand your GOD and higher lines of sequence, you get a lot more balance and truly understand how to modify that lines, triangulation lines of box into circles, even star mechanism lines, 3 signals of positions, 3 lines of signal location setting, and 3 molecules of design. So we got an A track, we got a B center, equals lines of C equals lines of D, and D equals lines of E in travel. Okay, now, just in the alphabetical setting, I go from A, and I go from B, and I go from C, and D, and E. Okay, anything I travel in lines, if I'm going from A, B, C, and D, and E, right, F is not in process yet. It's not in direction. So I have to formulate that, bring it in standby. Then F comes in. E equals lines of F. Okay, now, you can't modify something because it's not written yet. And the reason why it's not written until you understand the mind's already set this up. So if the mind has already set it up, it's all levels of what? What is it doing? Trying to get the body in alignment of just existing and evolving and expanding and exploring in itself. That's it, nothing else. But the provisional location puts you lines of A, B, C, and D that's already set its position. So A is done, B is done, C is done, D is done, E is done. It's already done through the mind, right? But it's already gone through the process of 26,000 lines of letters and travel. And the body is just trying to catch up to its measure and scale through formula, through its equation, right? Your life force consists of a continuous force that has internal and external force in one. The process of communication setting to truly understand how to use that the Fibonacci this way in travel, okay, and understand the Fibonacci in this way in travel, going in the same direction as setting in travel communications of 6 and 9, right? So what changes all that is all through intent. So let's get into process communication lines. So we're going to A, we're going to B, and we go into C, we go into D, and we go into E, and we go into F. Let's start with that settings, okay? All right, so this is your Earth. Okay, it travels in 3 lines of graphs, okay? Solar graph, median graph, simulation graph, holographic graph, pixelation graph, center graph, flash stripe graph, and communications and settings, flux over screen, all right? Measure and scale. So all this is done through the mind. It's all done. So what you have to understand, the mind itself is just the imagination of itself that modifies the system. So A is done, B is done, C is done, D is done, E is done, and F is done through platform of gain. Platform 1, platform 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 are done already, right? So the process of communication levels, this is where it comes to A tracks, Ground lines of 1, ground lines of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Start with the 6 of grounds, right? Setting lines of alpha, delta, theta, 3 screens, adaptations of flux. Schumann resonance in a box frame, setting lines of measure and scale of gauging. Directing lines of signals, ground lines of settings, process communication setting. You can't go an overlapping setting in position location until you understand how to use line calculation setting. Going through A, you in setting a body, into B, a setting a body, into C, setting a body, into D, into E, and into F through precognition. Which means your body has to catch up to pi. The recognition. Force of recognition setting all over the system. In your cognitive systems, guys. Okay? So what is your body doing, creating through the line screen adaptation settings every time you get up in a sequence? It's Schumann resonance. Ooh-ah. And that's all done through what instructions? The higher self. You're always working with the higher self. You're always working with your avatar. And you're always working with all levels of your sim. You're always looking with lines, core centers, your soul, your positions to your galactic unit, your symbiotes, and location setting to your set track location, your systems to your transformer. Right? But anything in box frame comes in track location lines. The Schumann resonance sets the graph communication set and measure and gates, set lines of communication and setting off your travel. Right? Setting sequence lines of ground lines of surface and travel communications. Okay? Set lines of beta, set lines of alpha. Set lines into omega. Waves, essential settings, right? Ground lines of settings, high lines of surface and travel. Okay? Indicate core centers, lines of settings, process lines of 1, 2, and 3. Measures and scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And travel. Okay? Online sequence, X2000 comes in platform, direct signal lines, grounds, platitudes, high positions over 0, process lines of 0, process lines of 1, and signal. Okay, so when you just have fun, it's just great. And then you see the Schumann resonance and travel. Okay, Schumann resonance and travel. Okay, so that's all the higher self is doing, is grounding its system through all laws of measure and scale and barometer and thermometer. Setting core centers, lines of calculation setting. Setting lines of sequence, all through panels, all communication to a system, all through travel. So the mind's already set up A to F. So the body has to stay in the alignment through precog. So it understands how to use the Schumann resonance, how to use the power generator, how to use the atmospheres, and its highways and travel. Once it gets in that provisions, it gets much easier through tractions. All right? All right, so let's set in sequence. Okay, setting lines of travel, right? The mind's already set everything up, so it's nothing to do, is there? But you have to process where the mind's coming from, which is where? Everywhere and nowhere all at once. So if you get in that position location in the system, you have your Earth. This is your Earth, right? All you're doing, and like I said, is just creating a map inside your system, what your Earth is in settings. That's all it is in position, right? But the mind itself has already set this up. This is already done. Now the body has to stay in the alignment now, of where it needs to be next to its pi. It goes here. Oh, now it's going here. No, it's got to go here. No, it's got to go here. No, it's got to go here. Now it's got to go here. Oh, there it is in travel. That's what your body's doing now. Team. It's trying to stand the infrastructure where it is in point lines of graph. Sets core centers and box frames. Set lines of 3 lines of measure and scale. Open windows, frames, and travel communications. Right? Directing signal lines of grounds. Open lines of windows and frame communication lines. And calculates the screen line adaptation to its setting. Okay, setting signals, lines of ground lines of modification, ground lines, communication, astral travels, and communication lines of setting. And set tractions. Existing and evolving and expanding all at once with its window frames. Setting lines of grounds, Schumann resonance, power generation screens into all levels modification line the atmosphere screen locations. Inside the frame. Okay, so that's the provision line of the body, what's doing attractions. All right, so it's trying to catch up to its measure and scale. Okay, in its Richter scale, core center's location is barometer, thermometer, location to its gauging. Delta heading, Tango Tango Foxtrot, anything in travel communications. Right? But that's all it is in settings. Okay? That's all it is. Your body's going through its map now of what the mind's already created through its creation of creating, which is everything. The mind itself is the creation of space and time, guys. Now, the more you modify that, the more it gets much easier to see where you're going to be in time and measure and scale and balance. Not just existing, not just evolving yourselves, but understanding of where you are at all times, in seconds, minutes, and hours. Okay, in your earth supposition, inside of you instructions. Okay, inside, outside, inside, right? So each platform has its gain level that you go through. Okay, there's your platform 1. There's your platform 2. Okay, and there's your platform 3. There's your platform 4, platform 5, and set positions, instructions. Okay, different levels of the game. Start with your 12 foundation lines, sets course, standard, location, setting, and 3 lines of attractions, all levels into your higher self. Higher self lines of 13 attractions equals lines of 0, 1. Okay. Set correlations of the avatar, calculation line equal lines, high position of 14 measure, scales communication lines of 0, 0.1. Okay. Set lines of sim, sets calculation high centers, equals lines of high position of 15 measure, scales communication line high position of 4 zeros, lines of 1. See how it all comes together through clocking? Clocking through the higher self of 0, 1. Clock lines of the avatar of 0, 0, 1. Clock line communication lines of high center location of sim. In position lines of 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of scale, 3 line divisions, 3, 3, 3. Sets track location lines, the avatar line position location of the system, all 3 dot and center line calculation setting 2, 2, 2. Serrated panels, line core setting, higher south, line track correlation setting, position location 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And all 3 measure, all 3 scale. Clocking your system to your earth tones is a travel line, position lines across lines. Calculations, green line adaptation, your point graphs. Everybody knows what a PowerPoint is, right? Through graphic communication of screen lines. It's like you're looking at a graphing screen, and basically you understand your embedment system, you understand your empowerment system, you understand your light tractions, you understand your metaphors, you're picking up your data, you're picking up your intel. So you're processing this and you're processing that. All through box frame, all through measure, all through scale. All right, so you got a higher self here, avatar here, and sim here on your graph. Okay? All through Schumann resonance. The higher self controls everything of the grounds in set position. Schumann. Right? The avatar controls everything in altercation lines of grounds, lines of settings, and window frames, and travels and point lines of graph. Setting lines of the sim overrides the signal location of its graphical screen lines of adaptation of its game of its system over traction set calculations. So it overlooks in setting. The sim itself overlooks down and shift lines what it's created through its anomaly in set tractions. All right, the oversoul comes into its ancestry, history, and celestial and track communications. All right, and anything above comes high lines of signals, outlines of pyramid. That's why I want you guys to get outside of your box, outside of your triangulation. So then here, 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 right? That's indicate lines of 3 inside. Okay, but now you have to stand outlines of screen adaptation of 3 outside. Triangulation here at 3, triangulation here at 3, supposition lines of 2, supposition lines of 2, supposition lines of 2, supposition lines of 2, supposition lines of 1, supposition lines of 1, suppositions of 3, supposition of 2, suppositions of 2. Okay? From 0 to 12, you guys understand inner force and outer force, inner link, outer link, inner realm, outer realm, inner orbit, out of orbit, inner space, outer space, inner calculation, outer calculations, outer norm, inner spectrum, outer spectrum, inner core, right? So it's basically understanding how to see triangulation inside and outside in numbers and sequence, or symbolism, or letters, or shapes, instructions, all through your perimeters and 3 lines of signals. Okay, in graph communications, interaction, all through measure, all through scale, all through balance, and set traction communications. Okay, that's all through triangulation. 3 in, 3 out. All right, so when you understand the process of that, out of sync, out of mind, puts all communication lines at 3 circles. 1 position, 2 position, 3 centers. Right? Habitation zone, inhabitation. Okay? No habitation. Habitation, inhabitation, no habitation. That's the nothing right here. But your mind's always here in sequence, everywhere all at once. So it's already done this all through pi. So the body is trying to stand here, graph communication here, graph communications here in 3 settings. All through trial. But the mind is a constant continuous flow that's done everything in settings. This is not about reminder. This is not about remember. This is who you are and who you've always been. Is to codify your system to get you interactions, how to use the precogs of your cognitive system. Start to see the frames of where you're going to be in hours, seconds or minutes or days or months or years or centuries or decades. Okay? Where your body's always been. So your mind has done everything through what? It's infinity. So when I say there's nothing to do, there's nothing to do. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to think. You never needed to think. There's nothing to think. It's the thoughts and action motions that creates its all levels of settings, opposition. And all through attractions, how you come into all modification grounds. Getting your balance is knowing exactly what you're doing in your habitations, your inhabitation zones, and no habitation zones. No habitation is what? No inhabitation zones. You see how that works in the force line calculation setting, where nothing exists, but exists all at once in system, all through traction, all through vision. But the body has to understand its alignment, guys, of where it's going to be next. Okay? So do this again. This is your mind. Your mind is already set up as earth. Okay, it's already done. It's already done. It's done, 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 done. So the body is just going through its alignment now, where it's supposed to be. Okay, that's it. Nothing else. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. So it's already created its gain modulation system. It's already created its all modification lines as GOD. It's created all communications through its cycle. Now the body just has to stand in the alignment, so know exactly what levels of the game it's going to be in and travel in communication setting high lines of surface and traction. Okay, next levels of the game. You live in the lower spectrum or you live in the high spectrum of game. That's all this is, nothing else. All right. So everything in your triangulation box is all set up in line, position, location, your system, right? Your whole infinity of the game is done. It is done. AI settings, high travels, endpoint, communication lines of graph, and center calculation setting the system. Okay. So hopefully you guys get a better understanding how important it is to really just basically do nothing. There's nothing to do. All you got to do is just come into your vision now of everything that's done. It's a constant continuous flow of lines of direction to its operation of networking of just all levels in high centers of just existing, guys. Directions, operation, network existing. Okay? Remember, the mind can't live out without the body, and the body can't live out the mind. So that means the process of communication setting to the soul communication setting. The mind can't live out the heart can't live out the soul, and the soul can't live out the body. Now, once you get into the mind adaptation setting, then you realize, well, the mind can't live with the brain now. So the brain can't live with the heart. That means the heart can't live with the soul. And that means the soul can't live with the body. It's a collaboration of one. That's a unification of one. This is ascension line communication setting. This is an operation system of one, which is raw, which is together, which is unity in communications. All set in you in position. Okay? See you in 5.